Welcome, and as we have previously examined Jahm ibn Ṣafwān's doctrines, we now turn our attention to Ḍirār ibn Amr, whose ideas bear a close connection with Jahamite's thought. Ḍirār ibn Amr was among the earliest Muslim scholars to explore the philosophy of nature, ontology, and epistemology. Jahm ibn Ṣafwān lived and taught in northeastern Iran, likely never leaving Khurasan. However, in contrast, Ḍirār ibn Amr, originally from Kufa, was associated with the second generation mutazilites of Basra in his youth, and later with the scholars of Baghdad. Some critics labeled him a jahamite, though he never met Jahm ibn Ṣafwān and even refuted his views in enough of his writings. And in this discussion, we focus on Ḍirār ibn Amr's key doctrines and his intellectual parallels with Jahm ibn Ṣafwān, which led figures like an-Nazzam to perceive a connection between them. While neither Jahm ibn Ṣafwān nor Ḍirār ibn Amr's works survive, doxographical sources summarize their ideas on physical, epistemological, and theological issues. These include the nature of the corporeal existence, change in the physical world, causality, and the distinction between sensory perception, conceptual knowledge, and intuition of an eternal, indivisible God. The accounts of Ḍirār ibn Amr's doctrines mainly focus on two key ideas. Number one, the Bendel theory of body, which suggests that bodies are simply a collection of a'rad or accident. Number two, the rejection of the idea that bodies have hidden or the intrinsic powers or potentials that cause the changes in the material substances. And this idea is similar to what the theory of Gregory of Nyssa, who argued that the madda, the material world, originates from the alla madda, immaterial, by the will of God. Gregory developed this idea as a part of his Christian philosophy of creation, and according to him, all material things are a combination and assemblage of the qualities or the properties that come from God only. And by themselves, these qualities and properties are immaterial and nonsensible concepts. He says that they exist as a pure thought, but when they combine, they form matter. Gregory further argues that the matter can only be understood through these intelligible qualities and properties. Material things are only conceivable by means of their intelligible qualities. And this idea is linked to the Middle Platonic interpretation of a Platonic forms as a thought of God. And Gregory replaces this idea with the notion that the world consists of intelligible qualities or as-sifat al-ma'qula rather than the forms in matter. And this is related to the philosophical discussions among Peripatetics, Platonists, Stoics about whether qualities are material or not. Like Gregory, Ḍirār ibn Amr makes an analogy between how the corporeal world originates and how we understand its parts. He argues that the universe is the intelligible through the decomposition of its parts, which were combined by the God's act of creation, or by the iradatullah. He refers to the intelligible properties that materialize through the combination as a'rad, or the accidents. In this, he follows Alexander of Aphrodisias and Porphyry's distinction between inseparable and separable accidents. His theory of qualitative and substantial change also shows influence from Aristotle. However, despite his reliance on the Aristotelian philosophy of nature, Ḍirār ibn Amr differs significantly from Aristotle, Plotinus, and Philoponus. And according to Ḍirār, al-madda al-mahsusa, the perceptible substance, is not a combination of qualities and matter. There is no prime matter or material elements beyond the a'rad or accidents that makes up the physical world. And even there is no form or essence that correspond to the matter. And Ḍirār ibn Amr's view, as-sifat al-ma'qula, are intelligible qualities, and as-sifat al-mahsusa, are sensible qualities, correspond one to one. For humans, reality is the sensible world with no hidden reality behind it, except for the absolutely simple, incomposite God, or Allahu al-ahadu alladhi la tarkiba fihi. The reason Ḍirār ibn Amr rejects the concept of material elements and the forms and essence is that he follows Aristotle's methodology of natural science. Ḍirār ibn Amr applied this approach to all our sensible bodies, treating their differential parts as a'rad or accident. His fellow Mu'tazili thinker Mu'ammar used the term al-ma'ani for the same concept. These accidents exist both in mind and the external world. Ḍirār ibn Amr even wrote a critique of Aristotle's theory of the substance and accidents, in which he likely denied the essentialism. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that he had direct access to Aristotle's works. His theory about how God synthesized the cosmos and how we analyze the corporeal world likely comes from the Porphyrian tradition, which was mediated by Christian sources. To confirm this theory, we need detailed reconstruction of his thought by analyzing the doctrines attributed to him with special attention to terminology and phrasing. The most systematic and comprehensive account of Ḍirār ibn Amr's physical theory is found in Maqālāt al-Islāmiyyah by al-Shari. Now we'll examine this text and we'll use the other sources as well to clarify its meaning and its philosophical background. Although the text is extremely brief and concise, it becomes clearer when viewed in the light of the ancient and late ancient philosophical and patristic traditions. Ḍirār ibn Amr said, "Jism is a'rād that are composed and combined. Ullifat wa jumiyat, and then they establish and exist. Faqamat wa thabatat." Ḍirār ibn Amr further said, the body is an aggregate of accidents which are composed and combined and then subsist and exist in experimental reality and become a body which bears the accident whenever is a substate of inherence and change or the taghayyur from one condition to another. This statement on Ḍirār's doctrine has been interpreted as describing the jism as an aggregate of the basic a'rād or a'rād and jawhariyah or a'rād jawhariyah, and that once this aggregate is formed, it can become the bearer of additional inhering a'rād or a'rād aridah. And the distinction between these two types of the a'rād that are accidents in Ḍirār ibn Amr's thought is based on the concept of the inseparability and separability rather than the temporal priority and posteriority. Instead, the distinction refers to the persistence and non-persistence as well as indispensability and non-indispensability. The classical reference that underlies Ḍirār ibn Amr's aggregate theory can be traced back to Porphyry, who stated in his Asagogue that every individual is combined out of the characteristics forming an aggregate, a total unique to that individual. Porphyry illustrated this with example of the Socrates, whose characteristics such as white, a man approaching, and son of Sophroniscus forming a unique identity. The totality of these characteristics is coextensive with the name Socrates and its referent as long as no other individual matches the same set of attributes. He further distinguishes between the peculiar characteristic of an individual and the common characteristic of a species. When Ḍirār ibn Amr states that jism in a'rād, he refers to the common a'rād shared by all bodies as long as they exist as bodies. Jism represents the highest genus of all corporeal entities. From different perspectives, like epistemologically, jism refers to the universal and intelligible body. Logically, it refers to the genus body. Ontologically, it refers to the common, persistent matter underlying all material things. The phrase al-jism in a'rād expresses the coextensiveness between the subject and the predicates. The intelligible jism and the genus body are constituted by the set of the coordinative a'rād. And according to the Gargari of Nisa, the intelligible body exists only in thought. The genus body encompasses all possible composition of the material bodies, but doesn't have an extramental reality apart from the concrete peculiar composition of the specific a'rād that constitute it. The common matter of jism is by itself imperceptible. It is neither alive, nor dead, neither red, nor of any particular color, nor heavy, nor light. Rather, it exists in potentia, capable of bearing any contraries that fall under its properties. Logically, it is prior to the individual natural bodies, but is not prior to them in generation, time, or epistemology. In Ḍirār ibn Amr's theory, the term jism doesn't signify in its sense of the jawhar, but either the genus body as a whole, the total sum of the a'rād, an individual body, which is likewise the sum of its a'rād or accidents. The sources do not explicitly mention Ḍirār ibn Amr's views on the relationship between the jism and ruh. However, his claim that the jism is a compound of the a'rād and that insan is also a compound of a'rād suggests that the ruh is also an a'rād or an accident. And this was later taken up by Rawandi, roughly in 9th century, and he said that al-insan huwa a'rād mujtama'a for ruh ard. This means that ruh is one of the a'rād that constitute the insan and making it an accidental property rather than a distinct essence. The phrase jism, whenever it is mahal of hulul, doesn't apply that jism exists before the individual composition of the a'rād. Rather, it expresses the simultaneity of the corporeality as a substrate of the mahal and that existence of inhering a'rād. These inhering a'rād determine individual particular bodies forming the totality of the general jism, for as long as the physical world exists as a part of the divine creation. Ḍirār ibn Amr's understanding of a jism as a permanent substrate that bears non-permanent a'rād or the accident has its root in Alexander of the Aphrodisia's concept of the second substrate, a term also implied by the Porphyry and Philoppianus as well. And according to Alexander's commentary on the Cairo, the second substrate, that which is three-dimensional, not in the sense of a particular body, but as the matter from which individual natural bodies are composed and when they come into the being, and into which they decompose and they perish. It serves as an eternal substrate of change, but when considered in itself, it lacks the changing qualities of the particular bodies, even though it always coexists with the three-dimensionality. And similarly, Philoponus described the second substrate as the unqualified body, or al-jism al-ghayr mawsuf, which is signified by the term the three-dimensional. In itself, it remains indeterminate, which is why it is always susceptible to different magnitudes and shapes. As such, it is generated an unchanging subject of all physical change. Three-dimensionality is then defined as an intermediate quantity, and since quantity itself is an inseparable a'rād, or the accident of the body, three-dimensionality must also be considered as an inseparable a'rād of the body. The same concept of the material corporeality as the substrate for generation, corruption, and alteration was later adopted by the Basil of Caesarea and Gregory of Nyssa. In their theory of creation, this substrate is considered logically prior to the individual bodies, but neither ontologically nor temporally prior. The Ḍirār ibn Amr's concept inspires from Aristotle's doctrine that substance can undergo changes because they are receptive of the contraries, whereas the qualities themselves are not. The a'rād, or the accident that define the unity of a particular body, are replaceable either through qualitative change or the taghayyur kayfi, or substantial change, or istihala jawhariyya. And then corporeality remains the continuous, persistent, constant throughout all types of the material change, as long as the composition and combination of the a'rād or the accident constitute a body is sustained. Ḍirār ibn Amr implies the term ard, or the accident, in contrast to the jawhar, following its technical definition, where the distinction lies between that which exists in a substrate, or fil mahal, and the substrate itself, or al mahal, and this corresponds to the Greek distinction between the being in a substrate and the substrate itself. And this description of the a'rād, or the ard, or the accident, also applies to Ḍirār ibn Amr's notion of the inseparable a'rād, or the a'rād lazima of a body, as he treats them as a part or the ajza of that body. Moreover, Alexander of Aphrodisias defined an inseparable a'rād, or an accident, as an epiphenomena, something that necessarily accompanies the entity from which it is inseparable. And this aligns with the Ḍirār ibn Amr's understanding of the inseparable a'rād, or the a'rād lazima of a body, which constitute its permanent yet immutable properties. Our examination of Ḍirār ibn Amr reveals a sophisticated and remarkably early Islamic engagement with the question of ontology, material composition, and epistemology. Drawing on Aristotelian methods, Porphyrian logic, and even concepts parallel to late anti-Christian thought, Ḍirār ibn Amr developed a radical accidentalist metaphysics in which the body is nothing but a coordinated aggregate of the a'rād, or the accidents. By denying the existence of jawhar, or the substance, forms, and the material elements, he advanced a bold critique of essentialism, or the arguably one of the most philosophically nuanced doctrines within early Mutazilites and broader Islamic theology. In our next segment, we'll turn to Ḍirār ibn Amr's views on God's attributes, divine agency, and moral responsibility, where we'll also explore how his natural philosophy intersects with his theology. We'll also analyze his doctrine of the divine simplicity, his understanding of volition and justice, and compare his position with his contemporaries.